Welcome back to our study of the history and theology of the 5 points of Calvinism. In this lecture, in this episode, we're going to be talking about how did the 5 points as we understand them in the acrostic TULIP originate? Where did they originate from? How did we get them in church history? Contrary to some popular beliefs that are out there among Arminian theologians, Calvin did not walk around going, these are my 5 beliefs summarized in these 5 points, TULIP. Neither was it that his followers went around saying, we're 5-point Calvinists. No, they were pretty much known as either reformers or they were known as Augustinians. Well, where did the 5 points come from then? How can we talk about them and how come they're so popular today? What's the big controversy over them? Well, they were really born out of controversy. In order to understand the 5 points of Calvinism, you really have to understand the Synod of Dort. The Synod of Dort assembled in 1611 to discuss the 5 points of Arminianism. So now we're going to go one more step back. In order to understand the 5 points of Calvinism, you have to understand the 5 points of Arminianism. And in order to understand the 5 points of Arminianism, it's important to understand where they originated, and that is with Jacob Arminius. Jacob Arminius was a Dutch theologian who originally learned from Theodore Beza in Switzerland. Now, Theodore Beza was Calvin's chief successor, and he was the one who basically carried on the mantle of Calvinistic theology, although it was not summarized, and it still can't be summarized totally in 5 points, but particularly then it wasn't summarized in 5 points. Now, he was raised on Beza. He listened to Beza. He understood Beza, this Jacob Arminius. But in 1603, he received his doctorate himself from the University of Leiden in Holland. And he taught theology at Leiden from 1603 to 1609, just kind of around about the time he died. Well, what happened to him? He was a Calvinist, or believed in Calvinistic theology, student of Beza. What went wrong? One could ask. Well, what went wrong was he got into a debate with a Catholic theologian, and this Catholic theologian kind of whooped up on him. He found himself on the losing end of this debate. This caused him to do some severe introspection into his own theology, wondering if the Reformation didn't go too far. And the first place he really started to re-examine was in Romans chapter 7. Romans chapter 7, for many Calvinists, and I believe it's the correct view, and for many Christians in general, really deals with the inward struggle as a Christian. Paul talks about his own inward struggle when he says the very thing I don't want to do is the very thing I do, and the very thing I do is what I don't want to do. This is the inward struggle that I think all Christians feel, at least at certain times in their life, in their Christian walk. They want to follow God with a full and pure heart, but they also have another nature, and that old sin nature still pulling on their emotions, and we're doing things that we want to do because we want to do them, we want to sin. Well, we have two natures working within us. We have the nature that wants to please God as a Christian from being born again by His Spirit, but we still have the sin nature that desires not to please God and desires our own passions and our own lusts. Well, what Jacob Arminius did was he said, no, what that is Paul before his conversion, who really in his heart wants to follow God but can't find the strength to do it. Now, this is important because this becomes the foundation for the whole theology of Calvinism, the whole theology of Arminianism, and that is a theology of free will. See, man has this freedom to desire in and of himself, in the fallen state, to follow God. He just can't find the strength to do it, but he has the desire. His free will is there in some sense. Now, he also played with the foreknowledge view of predestination. There's some question to whether or not he actually believed it, but he certainly did open the door for other people to believe it. The foreknowledge view of predestination basically says that God looks down the corridor of time. He sees, I see that you're going to choose me, so therefore I choose you. That's the foreknowledge view. Again, like I said, there was some debate whether or not he believed it, but he did toy with it, and he certainly left the door open for his followers to believe it, and that they did. Now, he had certain followers who were very popular theologians as well. I'm going to talk about 3 of them really quickly, and I might not be pronouncing them correctly, so don't think that I'm all washed up. You don't have to think that. I am all washed up. But don't think that just because I'm mispronouncing these names. I might mispronounce them. Don't go around saying, oh, this Ian guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. The first one is Simon Episcopus, or Simon Bishop. He was a very interesting theologian because he taught a form of subordinationism. Subordinationism is a bit of a Trinitarian heresy. Now, there's a question of whether or not his view of subordination crossed the line into heresy, but it wasn't a good view of subordinationism. Subordinationism is basically the view that within the nature of Christ's deity, not the nature in the economic trinity or anything like that, but in his deity, he was subservient, that there was a nature of his deity that was different to the nature of the Father's deity. Now, we're not talking about persons, we're not talking about, we're not compromising the doctrine of the Trinity, but in the nature of his deity was subservient to the Father, not just his humanity and not just his person and not just his role in the economic trinity. So he kind of toyed with that. He also believed that right living was a little bit better than right doctrine. You could see why he would be attracted to Arminianism. He said, it's better to live right than it is to think right. Well, another person was Johannes Wheaton Bogart, and he was important because he's actually the person who wrote the 5 doctrines of Arminianism, or he wrote what's called the remonstrance, the remonstrances to the Holland Church, or to the Dutch Church. So if I call it remonstrance or the 5 doctrines of Arminianism, you'll know what I'm talking about. Now, he wrote these because he said these are the problems. He was a theologian, and he said these are the problems with the Dutch Church. What they basically believed is that the Dutch Church, that the Reformation went too far, and that they needed to go not all the way back to Rome, but they needed to go halfway back. Now, it's important that we don't mischaracterize these people, because a lot of them, were very much Christians, and very much Arminian Christians, pardon the pun, but they were Christians. They didn't want to go all the way back to Rome, but they thought that the Reformation had gone too far. Another popular theologian was a guy by the last name of De Grotus. He was a law student, but he very much was a theologian as well, and he believed that his biggest problem was that he believed that human reason was the final court of appeal. He said that you shouldn't use the scriptures when dealing with people, you should use human reason. So you could see why these people would be popular Arminian theologians. Now, what happened? These theologians were gaining popularity, Jacob Arminius and these other people. Jacob Arminius was getting people to believe in this stuff, and believing that the church had gone too far and gone halfway back. And finally, in 1611, the Dutch church said, we've had enough. We're going to call together a council, and we're going to set up counter-remonstrance. Or actually what they did before they even did counter-remonstrance is they gave them a fair chance. In 1611, when this happened, it's important to know that Jacob Arminius had died a year before this. And so it was his followers who came in. And he said, let's hear what you have, okay? We're going to set up this council. And there was over 80 delegates, and there were delegates from all over the world. As a matter of fact, there really hasn't been another delegation like this. Maybe the Westminster Confession, when they wrote that, would have been something similar. But this is a really energized and really exciting time. And they said, let's hear what you have. And they said, well, look, these are the views that we think you went too far on. We believe that man has a free will. They were very vocal about that. That yes, it's tainted by sin, but it's not dead in sin, and that that people can follow Christ. And we believe the catechisms are wrong when it comes to this point. And they said we also believe that election is not based on God's predestination, but it is based on God's foreknowledge. that God looks down the corridor of time, sees who's going to respond favorably, and then chooses based on that. And we believe that Christ died in order to save everybody, not just died for everybody, but died in order to save everybody. They believed in universal atonement, or hypothetical universalism. They believed that it was Christ's intent to save everybody in his death. And I said, oh, and man is free to deny that God's going to do everything he can, but this idea that God bursts in you the Spirit and then you believe is wrong. We believe that you believe and then become born again, or you can deny being born again. And so they didn't believe in what's known as irresistible grace either. And they also said that well, actually, I should say that they were half divided. They were divided on whether or not a person could be once saved, always saved. And this is very important when it comes to these Calvinians or these moderate Calvinists. They'll always say, "Well, I believe in once saved, always saved, so I'm not an Arminian." Say, well, you're not a Calvinist, but you are an Arminian, because the Arminians were divided on that point. Some of them believe that yes, you could lose your salvation, and some of them believe that you could not. They were never unified in that area. So appealing to once saved, always saved doesn't exclude you from being an Arminian. Well, they examined these things, and they came down on the side that this is wrong, that this is not true, this is not the gospel. And they were very vocal about it. As a matter of fact, sadly, kind of sadly, the debates got heated. People got upset. They said, well, we don't want to hear any more of this. Get out, and get out of Holland. And they kicked many people out of Holland. And they said that if they don't believe in the Reformation, then they're not welcome in any of the Dutch churches. And over 200 pastors were rejected and out of their church and out of their pulpit. So this was a big deal. I mean, this is a lot of people who were believing this. But when it came to the examination from all over the world, they said this is wrong. So when they kicked them out, and the people who left, they were like, we leave the assembly of the ungodly and all this stuff. They didn't leave on the best terms, we should say. Well, when they left, they drew up counter remonstrance, the church, the Synod of Dort, the church in Holland. They said, well, it's not just enough that we say no to these things, but what we need to do is we need to draw up 5 points in response to that. And that is historically where the 5 points of Calvinism came from. The 5 points of Calvinism were an answer to the 5 points of Arminianism. And, well, now you know. Well, I hope this helped, and I hope you understand a little bit more about where this came from in history, and I hope you continue to stay with me next time, because next time I'm going to be talking about a very important subject, and that is the very dividing line between Calvinism and Arminianism. The bottom line, what is the difference between Calvinism and Arminianism? So stay with me, and God bless you, and I pray you have a really good day.